Hello, this is Lizzie from Love from Lizzie. So here is my 10 cards, one kit, Love from Lizzie November 2016 card kit. This is my first card of the 10 kits. We're jumping straight in. And you're going to see a lot of me doing this throughout this video, which is holding the card up, looking at what I like, using my T-square ruler to measure what I want, and then using my scissors to cut. I've never been much of a measure it out sort of person, rather what I like the look of. And as you can see, I actually had a little play on the card with the stamps, and I just wanted to cover that over so that I didn't waste the cardstock. I always measure slightly larger than my card base so that once I've stuck it on, I can then trim around the edges. It's much easier than cutting it exactly right and then getting it exactly lined up. If you're working with stripes or with something that needs to be very straight and it will show if it's not, then perhaps cutting the right size and taking the time to measure it up makes sense. But in this instance, it's just a lot easier to lay it down, give it a good firm press, and then just take my scissors to the card and use the edge of the card with the large blade to trim off the excess. So this is incredibly exciting for me. I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time and I can't believe how well it's gone. So I hope you all like this. Okay, so I'm running one of the widest peel-offs there along and always saving the leftover piece because I'll be able to find some sort of use for that later on, no doubt. And then I'm using the middle one to create sort of a little bit of interest, define that edge a little bit more, and then the most narrow one, and I'm layering that just a little bit closer to the medium-sized one. And then looking to make sure that my edges are straight. The nice thing about the peel-offs is you can pull it up, and as long as you pull it straight, it will lay straight. So there are those lines all finished with. Okay, and so now I'm going to add some of the sticky gems into the centres of each of these snowflakes. I do try to use things that are exclusively in the kit, and there's a handful of extra items which I do run through at the end, so you'll be able to see. And these are different kind of peel-offs to the ones that I often usually use. These are the Merry Christmas peel-offs, they're also in the kit. They're nice and quick and simple, they look pretty, you can layer them up however you like, and silver is part of this month's theme in the kit. So that's the first card finished. Here's the second card. So I've used the other half of the cardstock on a top fold, and I'm measuring with the T-square ruler and my pencil, and then using my scissors just to trim that out. I must say there are 5 sheets of the white cardstock in this kit, and I do just cut them all in half, some lengthways and some widthways, so to create different kinds of card bases. Okay, so there I've stuck my patterned paper to the front. I'm going to leave that to dry for a moment. I'm going to do some stamping. So I've picked some patterned paper that coordinates nicely, and I've worked out whereabouts I want to have it. So I'm using some VersaFine here. Inked up the stamp, and I'm just checking to make sure it stamps nicely, and it does. VersaFine, I find usually the first time on a new stamp always stamps nicely, but it's best to check. Okay, so I've stamped that, and now I'm just taking the excess ink off there. I am using my grid mat to measure, and then I'm going to cut a panel. Now that I have the stamp down, I find that easier than trying to find the middle with the stamp after I've cut it. That's just a personal preference, different people like different methods. I'm being mindful here whilst I'm cutting and handling this piece of paper that the ink is still wet. And I'm afraid my camera did stop recording there, but I cut a piece of the mirror card slightly larger than my panel, and I did this by turning it over onto its front and with my pencil drawing and then snipping out. And then I stuck it down and I've wrapped some twine with one of the snowflake charms in the twine. And now I'm using some mounting foam, which is terrible. I'm just trying to use it up. I can't even remember where I got this one from. But it sticks to my non-stick scissors. It's not much fun. So I trimmed around the edges of the card to tidy it up, and then foam mounted the panel on the front. So this is card 3. Now this is by far my favourite patterns paper of the pack. I love blue and silver. As maybe you can tell by the nails and the kit, they are my absolute favourites. So here I'm having marked off the panel that I wanted, turned it over. I do almost all of my pencil work on the back so that I don't have to bother with rubbing it out with an eraser. And you can obviously use a trimmer instead of scissors, but I like that when I use my scissors, there isn't the wastage. That little piece hangs on the end and I can use it somewhere else. So there I used a dotted circle die, which was a Mama Elephant one, just to cut a circle out towards the top. And now this is some more mirror card. And I've just turned it over to the back to measure a panel that is very slightly wider on either edge than the panel of the snowflakes. And now I've die cut a little snowflake out of the vellum. And I'm going to use just one of the nice blue gems right in the middle of the snowflake, because then this way it will hide the adhesive that I'm going to use. And then I pop alternating between pale blue and clear gems on each of the little spikes, I suppose you could call it, on the snowflake. And then on the vellum I have just used my anti-static powder tool, and with the silver ink I have stamped Let It Snow, and then I have some silver embossing powder. This is just a heat it up one. Oh, I lie, sorry, I changed over. I decided to go with the clear embossing powder because I wanted the silver of the sentiment to shine through. Now with vellum, heat setting can be quite tricky. So as you can see that I'm doing here, I bring the heat gun onto the vellum for short, sharp bursts and then take it away again. And you can see it doesn't take any longer, it just helps it to stop from warping. Okay, so this is the silver panel. And I'm mounting that into the centre of my card. I'm using the grid lines of my mat to help me get that in the dead centre. And now for the patterned paper piece, I'm mounting that up with foam tape. You could also use fun foam, or you could even mount it flat. The reason that I was keen to mount this one a little bit higher is I wanted to mount the snowflake higher. And if it protruded too far, the edges might get caught and bent in the envelope as you're putting it in and out. So having this area raised as well just gives it sort of like a little nest to hide in. So I line that up so that it's in the middle. I only took off the bottom release paper so that I didn't have to peel them all off if they all went wrong. And then I've placed a small foam square behind the gem so that it can't be seen, and I've popped that in the middle of the opening in the pattern paper. And now I've very loosely trimmed the sentiments, and using some washi tape I lined up where this was to go. I always use washi tape when it's a very small piece I'm cutting, because my fingers get in the way or it could jog, and the washi tape just holds it still, which is great. And then I use another of the larger gems on the sentiment, again just so that I could pop a little bit of glue behind it, and then I dot a few small bits behind the sentiment where the lettering is thicker, and then using my tweezers so that my fingers are out of the way, I lay it down. And so that's the end of that card. Card number 4, this is a side fold, and I'm wanting to use that little piece that's left over. And had I ever used a trimmer last time, this wouldn't have worked. So this is why I like the old-fashioned scissors when I'm using the large sheets of paper. So measured and cut. And I'm lining everything up to make sure I like where it goes. And then I die cut my actual card base with the same circle die that I'd used before. And then I wet glue down my panel to the front of my card, which as always is very slightly larger. So I trim that down using my scissors after I've stuck it on. And now I'm going to stamp the snowflake in the centre of the circle. And because the card wants to open on me, I've used some washi tape there just to hold it in place so that when I stamp down, I will stamp exactly where I want to stamp. And for this card, I'm using the white pigment ink that came from the kit. And I do stamp so that the snowflake isn't completely upright, so that it does look a little bit more organic. And I do try to pick that up there. I think you can see it on camera. And now I have got a really cute baby blue embossing powder that I use. That's from my own stash. And then with the white embossing powder again, I just stamp 3 little snowflakes using the medium-sized snowflake around the edge. And again, I heat emboss that with the blue. And then using the pearls, I add some to the centre of the snowflake and again to the edges. You can now see why I wanted so many pearls and bling bits for this kit. It means that no card has to be scrimped on. And then I use, that's actually the leftover of the last peel off, along the border. And then I use some little gems for the front of the card. And I dot some about. And then I use a Merry Christmas peel off again. I don't know if you can see how I was getting that off there, but to save them from warping, because if you pull them, sometimes they stretch. So I curl the top of the sheet around my finger, and then sort of use my knife to flick the top parts of the letters out, and then use the knife or my finger that you see there to get under it and pull it out. And then I use my knife to hover before I stick it down. And there, so that's that card finished. Okay, so here's card 5. I've measured out a piece of the pattern paper and popped it on the front of the card base, and now I'm stamping the reindeer in the silver pigment ink directly onto the vellum. With hindsight, I would have stamped the reindeer a little higher, but I thought I was going to try and squeeze a sentiment on the top of the vellum as well. And then to set the reindeer, I'm using clear embossing powder, and again I'm heating and moving the heat tool away so as not to scorch the vellum, but look at the shine. The camera sadly can't pick it up. It is beautiful. And then using my craft knife, I make a really small incision, and then I use the back of the craft knife to push the twine through. And then I have a couple of very small silver brads just from my stash. I wouldn't even be able to tell you where they came from. And I pop one in either side at the top of the banner. Use the little tool to squidge it down. And then I thread the twine into the loops and create a bow. There's pictures of that at the end. My camera did stop recording, I apologise for that. So this is card 6, and I'm using some of the striped glitter paper from the pack. And then the border stamp from the reindeer die, and again I'm using the silver pigment ink here. And I used the lines from the grid on my stamp to make sure that I got that at a right angle. And then I used the clear embossing powder just to set it, to make sure that there's no transference of the silver pigment. And then I put the pattern paper with some wet glue on, and I die cut some of the snowflakes from the silver mirror card. And the circle that you can see at the top of the screen there was the leftover from one of my previous cards, and I die cut the snowflake from it, and then I die cut a silver snowflake, and I'm paper piecing them together. Inlaid die. Sorry, I apologise. And to do this, I just laid the snowflake in, and I run some tape across the back just to hold a little bit. And all those tiny little triangles that you see in the centre of the screen there, they were the leftover from when I die cut the white snowflake originally. I just saved all the little pieces and then popped them in. And now I'm stamping the sentiment, which is Merry Christmas, again from the reindeer stamp set, using the silver, and then covering and heat embossing that with the clear embossing powder again. Now, using some foam tape, I mounted the larger circle snowflake up. I did fuss around for a little while trying to make sure that I was happy with where it was, and I did overhang it slightly knowing that I would trim it, and then I just wanted to place my little silver snowflakes around. And so I now trim off the excess of the pattern's paper and of the circle from the edge. And there's my card. Oh, no it's not. I pop some of the pearls in the centres of each of the snowflakes. And that's now my card. Okay, card 7. This is using this is the blue glitter stars. It is quite difficult to see the glitter of the stars on screen. But I cut a panel of it using my T-square ruler again, and then I cut a little strip of the silver card just to show, for those of you that perhaps didn't get the kit, you can obviously get silver edging onto things. You just need to improvise with what you have. And I wanted to use the Christmas wishes from the snowflake stamp set here. And I used Memento Paris Dusk. It's a new ink pad to me, and I adore this colour. So I stamped that in the middle at the bottom. This is a side fold card that I've turned on its end, if that makes sense. So I've trimmed down the panel to be the right size, which usually I don't do, but it's because I wanted to wrap the ribbon around it and then mount that onto the front of the card, that way hiding the ribbon at the backs of the ribbon. So now that's all stuck to the front of the card, I now start in with some gems just to decorate, and it's almost sort of like a spray. I work using the rule of 3, and I try to space 2 together and 1 by itself as a kind of rule, I suppose. And then I die cut some of the smallest snowflakes from the silver cardstock, and I just play around with the positioning until I'm happy with those, and then stick those in place, all using the wet glue. And then last but not least, I decided to add some of the jingle bells, so I threaded 2 onto a piece of twine. Then I tied those together in a knot so that they sat nice and tight together. And then I just tied it in a knot onto the ribbon near that snowflake, so there was sort of a cluster, and it all worked with that visual line from the top left part of the card down to the bottom. And then I trimmed off the little excess pieces of twine. I did end up having to cut them actually quite close to the knots because you could see them, and I didn't like that. But yes, so that's that card. Not one for the post with those jingle bells, I'm afraid. Okay, so here's the next card, and I'm using the white pigment ink. And I didn't stamp that snowflake very well, so I wanted to go back. So please excuse my big old head in the way there. And I didn't stamp it exactly perfect, which was a shame, but to be honest, I don't think it really matters. When you've got a patterned background and the stamp itself isn't completely symmetrical, that's the sort of thing that you can get away with. And it adds character. It's a handmade card after all. Okay, so I start off with my largest stamp. I stamp 3, then the medium stamp, and I stamp 3 again. And then the smallest stamp I tend to use just to fill in any of the little edges. As you can see by the ink pads, the pigment ink is good and messy. So if you like getting inky, they're going to be great for you. And now I cut a piece of the silver mirror, slightly larger than the panel. And I pop the panel straight into the centre. And then once it's on, by eye, I trim this. Again, you could use a trimmer if you wanted, but just do please be warned that some trimmers, if they're not very sharp, may snag the silver cardstock. And here I've cut 3 little strips of one of the ribbons, and I'm making little loops using double-sided sellotape. And then I run a piece of the double-sided sellotape along one of the edges, and then turning it over from the front so that I can watch how much is hanging over, I stick these 3 little loops of ribbon in a line at the bottom. It's just another idea as to how you can use your ribbon. And then I put another piece of tape over the top just to add another reinforcement so that they don't come away. And then using foam tape so that the ribbons do have a little bit of wriggle room, if you like. I mount that panel up. And I place it towards, in the centre, but towards the top of my card. And then I run a Merry Christmas peel off near the ribbons on the panel and pop a few of the silver sequins on the front. Okay, card number 9, I'm using 2 rectangular stitched dies, and I'm using some very low tack masking tape here. And then I cut a frame from the lovely foiled paper from the kit, and then I use the smallest frame on the front of the card. Now this is quite difficult to see, so I cut most of this out in editing, but essentially I cut 5 strips of this clear thread. It's like a plastic thread, and then I tied a charm and the remaining 4 bells into the centre of each of these bits of thread, just with a double knot. Then I've placed a piece of double-sided sticky tape along the top of the frame on the inside, and I just position each of these 5 little bells and charms at different heights in the sellotape using the twine. It's supposed to be see-through, and it isn't exactly see-through, but it's not far off. So once I've got those all in place, I just snip off the extra of the thread, and I place some double-sided tape along the bottom, and then I turn it over, stick it onto the card front, and I popped a few gems along either side at the top, and that's the card there. So here's card 10. And again, using the T-square ruler, I measure a portion of the patterned paper and cut it out. Then I cut a piece of the vellum so that it will fit through my die cutting machine, my big shot. And so there's the rectangle with the stitching on the edge. I stick the patterned paper directly onto my card front. And then using the white pigment ink, again, I stamp the snowflake design onto the vellum. This is quite similar to the technique I did in the last card, but I'm just showing another way that it can be used. And stamping in 3s again, and making sure that the snowflakes go off the edge of the paper, so to help it look more organic. I did stamp 4 there of the little ones, of course. It's because I'd said about stamping 3s. But that's just so as to be able to fill up the space. And then I use the small one and I work around filling in all the little gaps that have been created. And I do apologise for how late this video is coming out. I had hopes to have it sooner, but my little boy has been really unwell, the poor little sausage. He's been away from nursery and he's been just wanting to sit with his mummy, and crafting doesn't happen when you want to be with your mummy. Okay, so I've heat embossed using white embossing powder on this occasion, and I'm using some of the clear gems in the centre of each of the snowflakes. Just working my way around. If there's a centre of a snowflake on the panel, it gets a gem. I don't create centres for the ones that are too far over the edge. Okay. And this, I did do a little bit backwards, so I do apologise, but it's through trial and error that we learn. So I wanted to add a piece of the ribbon, so I used my craft knife and I just cut a small slit about 2/3 of the way down, and then using the back of my craft knife, I push the ribbon through and then snip it off, and then all I wanted to do was tie a knot. But you see, this is where I got it wrong. The best thing to have done would have been to have stuck down the vellum first. I used my reverse tweezers as my finger to hold the knot, and now to stick the vellum down I have to sort of tuck it in, and I just put some glue behind each of the gems. And it wasn't terribly difficult what I had to do, there was an easier way, is all I wanted to say. And then I trimmed down the ends of the ribbon, and using some of the clear thread that I'd used earlier, I used the last snowflake charm, and I tied that in a knot around the knot on the ribbon and trimmed it down. Then using the silver ink pad, I stamped Christmas wishes, and then using silver embossing powder, I heat set that. Okay, so here are all the extra products that I used. I used a trimmer, scissors, T-square ruler, a couple of pencils, a sticky pencil, a couple of ink pads, the clear thread. I did also use my EK Success powder tool and some brads, the eyelets, the tiny eyelets. But that's all the additional products, and this is what I have left over. So I've got both of my ink pads. I've obviously got the Ziploc bags. I've got nearly half a sheet of the foil. So plenty of vellum, and this is all my patterned paper. There isn't a single sheet of pattern paper that I actually fully used, and there are 2 sheets that I didn't even get to use. So I will make more cards with this kit, and I'll post them on Instagram when I do. I've got my 2 stamp sets. I've got the Merry Christmas peel-offs, 2 sheets of gems, the dies, the twine, sequins, still more gems. I've got some of each of the ribbons, so there's still lots and lots of play in this kit after the 10 cards. And here are some still shots. I really hope you've enjoyed this. As it stands, I believe 70% of the stock has now sold, so there's not too many left. If you're interested, then just pop over to www.lovefromlizi.com and you'll see it on the homepage there. As I say, I will post in my blog and on Instagram with any further cards. The December card kit is being put together as we speak, which is really exciting. If there's anything that you would like to see in a kit, if there is any sort of product that you would just like to try but have things coordinate with it, then please do let me know, and I'll see if I can find a way to make it work. Thanks again for watching and liking. Take care. Bye.